Welcome. Today is the 11th day of Tammuz, the 17th of July, and we are up to the fourth reading of Parashat Balak. And here we finally see Balak and Bilam trying to do what Bilam was called for, and to curse the Jewish people, the Israelites. There is one verse that is focused on when it comes to these curses, and it explains the whole rationale behind Balaam's prophecies, everything that he was capable of doing. And this appears in Numbers 23, verse 8. And it says like this: "How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I invoke wrath when God has not been angered?" So this is a inflected type of translation. It's not exactly literal, but it captures the way that the sages understood this verse. The first part is very literal. How can I curse someone who God has not cursed? How can I awaken wrath against someone whom God has not had wrath against? That's the literal interpretation, but it's more in the direction of what we just explained. What does this mean? What does it mean, something that God has no wrath upon, and so on? One of the problems that everyone faces is anger. Everybody faces this. Unless you've done some incredible work on yourself, you have anger, and it comes out from time to time. Now, the sages say, or it's not exactly from the sages, it's from Maimonides, but there's hints to it already in the Talmud. He says if a person is angry at any point, it's as if he's worshipping a false god. Why? What's the idea? The idea is very simple. It says that if you feel that somehow something is not going your way, and you doubt that it is going God's way, that's when you get angry. In other words, our anger is when we ignore the fact that it's God who's running the show. And so it says Maimonides, if you're able to get angry, it means that you don't really think that God is in charge. And so you see things happening, they're not according to what you expected, they're not going your way, so you get angry at them, without recollecting that everything is in God's hands. So what does that mean? It means you've made yourself, your expectations, your beliefs, more important than God's. And your expectation from reality is based on your self-worship, as it's called. You're worshiping the self. You're saying, the world should run according to my expectations. So anger is very destructive, very detrimental, to the point where Maimonides says it's a form of idolatry. So can a person not get angry? Is there such a thing? Do we know anyone in this world, including Moses, who didn't get angry? There's no such thing. Everybody gets angry at some point. The amazing thing is that from this verse, the sages learned, and there's another verse, Kel zoem bechol yom, God is angry every day. I owe you to tell you where this verse is, which right now at the moment I don't remember. Let's see. It's from Psalm 7:12. And God is angry every day. From these two verses, we learn something amazing that the sages discuss in the tractate of Brachot, that even God gets angry every day. Even God does. In a moment we'll explain why he gets angry. But what does that mean? Does that mean that God worships a false idol. That doesn't make any sense. You can't take our situation and apply it to God directly. You have to think about it a little. So how does that work? We'll get to that in a moment. But the first thing to know is that every day there's a moment during which God gets angry. Now, as hard as it is to understand this, what does that even mean? So first of all, let's take the explanation given in the classic works. And this explanation I'm going to mention now is found in Sefer HaChinuch, which is one of the early compilations, the High Middle Ages, actually early Middle Ages, we're talking about the 12th century, compilation of the 613 commandments. And there he explains the following. He says that God looks at the world all the time. He has providence over the world all the time. And there is evil done in the world. And so every day, as God is looking at what mankind is doing, and the essence of mankind is that we have free will. So there are people who choose to do evil with it. And he looks at it, and it builds within him this frustration with, why did I give them free will? What did I do it for? Look at what they do with it. Now, it's not the overwhelming majority of what goes on in the world, but it is a certain amount, a certain percentage. And so the frustration, he says, builds. And every day there's a moment when God allows himself, he gives himself one moment to be angry at the world. He's not angry at a particular individual, he's not angry with a particular act. It's like the collective buildup, says the Chinuch, of all this evil that's going on. How long does his anger last? 1/23 of a second. That is the length of a rega, a moment in Torah. 1/23 of a second. It's really 1/76th of a chelik, which is, and there's 1080 chalakim, parts in an hour. It's a different division of time. The hours are the same, because the hours are based, of course, on the sun. But then minutes do not appear in Jewish law, and certainly not seconds, which are a secondary division. Instead, we have what are called parts, 1080 parts in a hour, and 1/76th of a part is a moment. And that's the time he allows himself. So first of all, the first thing we need to learn from this is, of course, you're a human being and you'll get angry, but you have to limit yourself. Don't ever let anger become who you are. Don't let anger take over. Of course, there are moments of frustration, there's moments of difficulty. You have to accept it. That's what it means to be a human being. But don't allow it to take over your day. Don't allow it to take over who you are. And like God, once that 1/23 of a second is over, it's finished. I'm done for the day. I'm not going to get angry again today. That's it. That's all there is. Doesn't matter what else is done. So first of all, that's an incredible lesson from this. Now, Balaam knew how to judge when this moment exactly is. And he said, at that moment, I can curse them. Because at that moment, God is angry. So I can take his anger and I can funnel it into cursing the Israelites. However, what he's saying here in this verse is, how can I have anger, or how can I funnel wrath at someone who there is no wrath at? And really, what does that mean? So the sages say, Rashi quotes it here, that during all the days that Balaam was on the prowl, waiting for that moment to come, anticipating that moment, God held back and didn't get angry for even one moment. So there was no anger to use, there was no anger to funnel, he was stuck. But now, what does this mean that God gets angry? What does that even mean? We said that by a person it means, figuratively, maybe even psychologically, that we follow something else than God. We follow ourselves. We are worshiping ourselves, basically. We're saying, what I think should happen in the world is much more important than what God thinks should happen in the world. And that's why I'm angry, because what I wanted didn't happen. How could that translate? How can we translate a statement like that to God? Well, this is the main discussion of the first innovation of the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria's Kabbalah. And his first, most important maybe, innovation was the idea of the contraction or the concealment of God's light. Now he says that when God creates the world, which really means creates anything, which really means creating me at this moment and creating you at this moment, the first thing that he does is he has to conceal himself. He has to contract his revelation so that you have room to function, so that you have free will to function in what seems to be a vacuum that's devoid of divine presence. That's the contraction. Now, this is only a metaphor. It's not that really God is not present. He is present. But it seems to me, for me to have free will, that he's not forcing me to do anything. So it seems to me as if he's absent. He's gone. He's not here. But really, he's only concealed. It's like the father telling his son, I'm going into the next room, be on your best behavior. Well, in truth, he doesn't leave. He's really looking at his son. He's just looking at him through a camera or something else. And the son doesn't know. He doesn't know he's really being observed. So God is really still here. There's no difference. It's just that he's concealed in order to allow us to have free will. What does it mean that he's angry? That at a particular moment in the day, he really does conceal himself, not just in the sense of not being seen, but it's if he comes and says, I'm not observing reality. I'm not looking at it right now. I'm so frustrated, I'm so angry at it, I don't want to look at it. For God, that means that he's not God at that moment. In a certain sense, he's not God. Well, what does that mean? How can that be? Again, this is a thought experiment. What does it mean that he's not acting like God? God means good. It's benevolent. At that moment, to be angry is not to be God. To be angry, to be able to dish out wrath, is not godly. Because what is it like? It's like a king who loses his temper and can't run his kingdom when he's angry. It's like a parent who loses his temper at his child and can't parent at that moment. He regresses to being like a child himself. When a person's angry, they're not a king. When a person's angry, they're not in control. When a person's angry, they can't fulfill their true function. By God, that means that at that moment of anger, that 1/23rd of a second, as it were, he's not the benevolent God that we know. At that moment, that's what Balaam wanted to use. He wanted to funnel the wrath that comes out at that 1/23rd of a second and dish it out to whomever he wanted. Meaning, in other words, he's saying, there's a moment in every day that God is not acting like God. He's not acting like the benevolent, all-powerful goodness that we know. Rather, he's angry now. And so at this moment, he's different. And I'm going to take advantage of that moment and take the energy that comes out at that moment, and that's what I'm going to use to curse them. So that is really the essence of everything Balaam did in his life. It was waiting for that moment that God is angry every day. And it happened to be, it didn't happen to be, it was on purpose that God said, on these days, when you're waiting for this moment in order to curse the Israelites, I'm not going to indulge myself in the anger that I usually have every day. There is not going to be a single moment of me not being the benevolent God that I am. And the sins and atrocities and all, it'll wait until you're done. And when you, Balaam, finish your whole show and you've given up, I can go back to running the world the way I understand it. But what this is telling us is that we have to be very careful with anger. Because anger, more than just being a sense of worshiping myself, it's actually a moment of losing myself. Losing my true purpose in life. My true purpose in life is to use every moment to do goodness. And when I'm angry, and this is how we learn how this reflects back on us, if I get angry, again, it's not completely possible to eradicate all anger from my life, but I have to know that in that moment that I'm angry, or that those few minutes, or that hour that I'm angry, I shouldn't make any decisions. Like every clear-minded person says, during those hours, I'm not me. I'm not as responsible. I cannot fulfill my duty. I cannot really promote the type of character that I want to have. And there's a very interesting thing that we'll end with. The Baal Shem Tov once told one of his greatest disciples, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polana, who wrote most of what we have from the Baal Shem Tov himself. He told him he was prone to anger, this man, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef. He was a genius, but he had anger. And the Baal Shem Tov told him, on any day, even any given day, the 24 hours surrounding this moment that you get angry, make sure not to make any legal rulings. He was also a rabbi, he was a dayan, he was a judge. He told him on a day in which, the whole day, even if you just get angry for a moment, you have to stay away from this, because the moment that you get angry, you lose yourself. You lose your ability to be yourself. So with this, we'll end today. Thanks for joining. I hope to see you again tomorrow in good health. And that from now until tomorrow this time, we may merit to be ourselves and not even have a single moment of anger. And we pray all the time that this week that we read the Parsha of Balak and we understand the essence of how Balaam worked, that we merit to have a week like this week, when God doesn't anger even for that moment. And if it holds for 1 week, we can hope that it can hold for another week, and so on, until the world is completely redeemed. All the best.